It's who you know, really. It's who you know. My sister Martha was a businesswoman in Bethany, which is just a stone's throw away from Jerusalem. And she knew firsthand the importance of a strong network of relationships. But more than that, we lived in the ancient Middle East, where people had to rely upon one another just to survive. If you were to travel any distance at all, there were no Super 8s. There were no pop-up campers. You had to rely upon the hospitality of strangers every night along your journey. Relationships are, in my view, far more important than knowledge. Information on its own is relatively useless. For example, quick show of hands, everyone. How many of you believe that God raises the dead? Show of hands, let's go. Oh, good for you. I remember growing up in synagogue learning that on the last day, God would raise all the dead and the righteous would be reunited with Father Abraham and the wicked would be punished forever. I remember learning all that, but did I really believe it? Did it change the way that I live my life? Probably not. I'm not sure that I really believed what I learned about God growing up. Until I met Jesus. And when we became friends, everything started to change. Like I said, we lived in Bethany, which is just past the Mount of Olives on the road from Jerusalem. I lived with my sisters, Mary and Martha, and man, talk about different. These two were about as different as two sisters could possibly be. Mary was this, I guess you'd call her a hippie, like a creative, free-flowing. She was an artist. And Martha was this independent businesswoman. They were like oil and water. It got interesting at times. For example, one time we heard that Jesus was coming through town, and we had so desperately wanted to meet him. We heard so much about him. And so we got word to him, we tried to get word to him that we wanted him to come to our home. Now, we didn't honestly think that someone with Jesus' reputation and popularity would accept our invitation, but he did. He showed up on our doorstep. Now, immediately, Martha got to work. She started cooking and cleaning and dusting and vacuuming, and they weren't even invented yet. I just remember Jesus sitting in our living room, speaking in a gentle voice to Mary, while Martha gutted it out in the kitchen, working herself to the bone and not happy about it. Eventually, she just couldn't take it anymore. She barged into the living room and complained to Jesus about her sister Mary. And I just remember Jesus looking at her. And I'll never forget what he said. Martha. Martha. You're worried and you're distracted by many things. But there are few things that are needed. Indeed, only one. And Mary has chosen the better part, which should not be taken away from her. We really hit it off with Jesus that first night. I mean, he was brutally honest, but deeply loving and so wise. We felt this profound sense of connection with him, and he loved us. From that night on, anytime he came through our city, he would stay with us. And whenever he came to our home, it was just wonderful. Man, we love that guy. It was just different when he was there. Everything he said made you hang on his every word. Everywhere he went, the atmosphere changed. Everyone who stood with him never forgot it. Oh, we love that guy. We sort of thought of it as doing our part to support him or give him a break from all the pressures and the problems that he faced in his travel. I mean, there was always mobs of people around him demanding his help with their problems. And the religious leaders, they were the worst. They were always trying to trap Jesus in his words so that they could arrest him, and if they could, put him to death. So we thought we were helping him. But little did we know, we would need Jesus' help very soon, and in a major way. It started with just a cough. Nothing serious. I heard there was a bug going around. I think they called it COVID-33 AD or something. I tried to help. I tried to do my part to flatten the curve. I washed my hands in the muddy river. I practiced biblical distancing. I did everything I could think of. And I thought, I'm fine. Well, eventually I got it. I thought it would go quickly, but it just hung around, and it just kept getting worse and worse. Eventually, breathing became difficult. And I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink. I couldn't get out of bed. So my sister sent word to Jesus saying, "The one whom you love is ill. He's sick." We thought he was going to jump on a horse right away. We thought he would ride. We thought he'd ride all night long and get there in the morning and heal me. But he didn't come. He didn't come. In fact, he waited 2 whole days before he even started walking to Bethany with his disciples. We didn't understand. We thought we were friends. Jesus never did come and heal me. And eventually, my family gathered around to say goodbye. My sisters each clasped one of my hands, weeping and calling out, listening to me fight for my last breaths. Nearby was a tomb that had been hollowed out of the rock face. It was custom to bury the dead with the bones of their ancestors, where together we could wait for the resurrection. But to my family, that boulder that covered the mouth of my tomb felt pretty final. It got hot in Bethany, and we buried our dead quickly. My body lay in that tomb in the heat of the day as one day passed, and then another, and another, and finally the 4th day came. And on that 4th day, they heard that Jesus was in the region. So my sisters went looking for him. And they found him separately, but when each of them met Jesus, they both said the same thing. Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. When God feels absent, we feel helpless. At those times, we wonder if God is real and if he cares. My family felt abandoned by God because he didn't come. As Jesus stood there talking to my grieving sisters and all who had come to mourn my death, he got very upset. In fact, he started to weep. Jesus wept. Everyone stood there watching God cry. Where have you laid him? He cried out as they led him to my tomb. I guess he wept because he cared and he loved us. That's what friends do, after all. We feel each other's pain. We hurt when they hurt. As Jesus walked to my tomb, everyone who watched him noticed that he grew more and more agitated. Something seemed to snap inside of him. The grief that he was feeling began to well up into something that resembled anger, and he called out in a loud voice, "Roll the stone away." Okay, that was a no-no. It doesn't matter how much you miss someone. Asking for the stone to be rolled away from an established tomb was like going to the cemetery with a shovel to exhume the remains of a loved one. No matter how much you miss someone, there are rules against such things, and Jesus was breaking every single one of them. Martha was dismayed. Lord, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days. Did I not tell you, he said to her, that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? And then he lifted his face to heaven and he began to pray. Father, thank you for hearing me. I know that you always hear me, but I'm saying this for the benefit of all who are standing here today, so that they too may know and may believe that you sent me. Now, to everyone's surprise, the young men had begun to follow Jesus' directions and roll the stone away from the tomb. So they began to work slowly, covering their mouths and gagging as they worked because of the awful stench. And when they finished, they ran away as quickly as they could, choking and gagging. But Jesus came closer and closer. And peering inside that dark doorway, he called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" Now, at this time, I was minding my own business. Very comfortably dead. I didn't hear the young men as they gagged and choked and rolled the stone away from my tomb. I heard nothing. I saw nothing. I was perfectly dead. But somehow, and I'll never be able to explain exactly how, I heard Jesus say, "Lazarus, come out." my dead ears perked up. Warm blood flowed into my cold limbs. Color flushed back into my face. And I took a long breath into my cold, dead lungs. And as I inhaled for the first time in 4 days, I thought to myself, ooh, this place stinks. My face was covered, though. And I couldn't move my arms or my legs. I'd been covered with some sort of constrictive Lululemon caliber outfit that turned out to be strips of cloth wrapped around my body like a mummy. So I wiggled and I twisted until I sat up. And then I slowly kind of twisted to the side and was able to put my feet upon the floor to stand up. Where the heck am I remember thinking to myself as I tried to peer through the cloth still covering my eyes. And what's that light over there? That voice I heard, the one calling me out of this dark room, I knew that voice. I'd heard that voice before. I tried walking towards the doorway, but since my legs were still bound, I could hop like a wounded rabbit. And eventually, it took some time, but I got there. And when I peered my head through the opening, I heard an entire crowd of people all gasp together. And then I heard that familiar voice again. Take off his grave clothes and let him go. Grave clothes, I remember thinking as they started to peel the strips of cloth from around my head. Why in the world would I be wearing The first face I saw was the face of Jesus. He had tears in his eyes and an angel smile on his face. I turned and I noticed that I had just walked out of a tomb. And that everyone around me was wearing mourning clothes, and they were beside themselves, weeping, laughing, crying, screaming, dancing. And then it hit me. This is my funeral. I was dead. As word got out about what Jesus did for me, I was surprised to hear that the religious leaders were upset about it. Now, you'd think they'd be excited about, having a guy around that could raise corpses and bring them back to life, but they were far too threatened by Jesus to value that, and they worked all the more hard to kill him. But not just him. They also wanted to kill me. Because anyone who heard my story would put their faith in Jesus, and they just couldn't have that. As long as I was alive, I was a liability. And so they looked for ways to take my life. And my family began to be extremely afraid. They began to fear for my life. And that just made me laugh. I went up to him, I'm like, guys, who's got 2 thumbs and ain't afraid of dying again? This guy right here. Been there, done that. Death was old news to me, baby. I was as afraid of dying as I was of going to sleep. Actually, I'm more afraid of going to sleep. It's kind of freaky to me to go to bed. Death was old news to me. You want to take me out? Be my guest. You want to kill me? Go ahead, make my day. You want to stop my heart? Do it. Because I know a guy, baby. I know a guy. I know a guy. And if you kill me, he may take his sweet old time, but eventually he's going to saunter up to my tomb and he's going to wake me up again because I know a guy. And besides that, I know what resurrection feels like. And I would highly recommend it. Seriously, do you think a day spa is pleasurable? You have got to try resurrection. It is fabulous! Seriously, with a friend like Jesus, why would I be afraid of dying again? But you know what shook me? You know what really threw me? When they killed him. When they put him on a cross. And when they buried him in a tomb behind his giant stone. That rattled me to the core. What happens when the guy who raises the dead dies? After a couple days, we had all but lost hope. Those were the darkest days of my life, and I am including the days in which I was dead in that. I wasn't in the room. I wasn't in the room when the risen Jesus first appeared to his disciples. But it didn't take much to convince me that he'd risen. And Scripture doesn't record what was said when the risen Christ and I met. But that's just as well. It was a private conversation between old friends. But I will tell you this. He wants to be your friend. Oh, I don't care what you know about Jesus. What matters is that you know him for who he truly is. A friend of sinners who conquered the grave. The one that you can trust with your life and with your death. With Jesus, you can live with courage, real courage. With no fear of missing out, no fear of aging, no fear of failure, no fear of death. You don't have to be afraid anymore. You don't have to live in fear anymore. Not because you have the right information or the right background, but because you have a right relationship with a God who turns funerals into family reunions. When you leave today, we're going to give you a gift. But before I tell you about it, I want to say one more thing that happened before I died. Before he raised me, from the dead, Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me will live even though they die. And those who live and believe in me will never die. Then he said, do you believe this? Well, do you? Do you believe that Jesus is stronger than death? Do you trust Jesus with your life and with your death? And do you know him as a friend who will one day knock on the door of your tomb and say, come out, dear friend? That gift. When you leave today, we're going to give you a simple strip of cloth, much like the ones that I was buried in. Whenever you feel like an underdog, whenever you feel like you are alone or afraid, whenever you feel like life is going to pass you by or swallow you up, whenever you feel like your best days are behind you, I want you to take that sucker out so that you can remember my story, so that you can remember Jesus, my friend, and yours. I'm telling you guys, it's who you know. It's who you know.
I learned that knowledge wasn't as important as who you know. And when I felt alone, I knew he'd be there. And when he showed up at my front door, every word just made me want more. And that night is when I first called him friend. And I said I wasn't dying till that day I got lying. And they said goodbye and shut the light away. But he woke me up from the darkness, and I breathed in, he brought me back to life. And when he said my name, I could see him smiling. And on his face was his angel smile. And I think I lived my life right after he saved me. And I know I don't need to live in fear. I still think about when he would come to my door to see me. And that night when I first called him my friend. And I said I wasn't dying, but that day I got lying. And they said goodbye and shut the light away. But it woke me up from the darkness, and I breathed in, it brought me back to life. And when he said my name, I couldn't hear him crying. And on his face was angel smile. 'Cause it woke me up from the darkness, and I breathed in, brought me back to life. And he said my name, I could see him crying. And on his face was his angel